I'm Ganesh Kumar from Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in Mumbai. So first of all, it's nice to be here in Patna, and I should thank Dr. Kumar Das for inviting us. My colleagues will be joining also tomorrow and the day after. So thank you, Dr. Kumar Das. So it's nice to visit Patna, and this is my first trip. I wish I had more time to go around a little bit, but anyway, that apart. So what I will do today is basically talk on some issues in agriculture, on Indian agriculture, which might be of interest to some researchers. I don't know if anyone amongst you is working on agricultural issues. These lectures may be of interest to some of them. For others, maybe it could be just passive learning. But whatever it is, I hope you find it interesting and useful as we go along. The way I've structured it is, in the morning I will have two lectures which cover essentially the spatial dimension of Indian agriculture. So I will talk to begin with. This paper is a very simplistic paper, what I will cover here, but it will give you, nevertheless, it will give you a certain overview of the kind of spatial dimension issues that people have discussed in the literature on Indian agriculture. And in my second lecture, it will be a little bit more technical, where I will talk of the role of geography and how it influences agricultural growth. Okay, so that's it's again looking at the spatial dimension. So these two are in that sense kind of following one from the other. In the afternoon, I will talk on two different topics. They're themselves not related to each other, and definitely not related to what I will be talking in the morning. So the first of the lectures in the afternoon would be on farmers' income, and the second one would be a very a nuanced kind of issue which relates to food consumption. Okay, so these are basically to give you a flavor of some of the research going on Indian agriculture. This is not the only set of issues people work on, but these are the issues that I have worked on, and so I have, in that sense, a better understanding of these issues. There are other issues relating to agriculture, such as the impact of climate change and so on, but those are things that I won't be talking today. Okay. So that said, let me get into this paper. This is a paper that I'm one of the co-authors of this paper, which is on the regional variations in agriculture development. What are the various dimensions and determinants and the policy aspects of it? Okay, it's co-authored with my institute director Mahendra Dev and my student Varun Das. Okay, so this is really the papers. This paper was actually prepared for a conference that was recently held at the Institute for Human Development in New Delhi, and it's also appearing, it will be coming soon in the conference proceeding that they plan to bring out probably in the next few months. Okay. What this paper does is that it looks at the spatial dimension of Indian agriculture, the spatial variation in agriculture, And this is an issue one can look at two different levels, at the macro level and at the micro level. So, and there are huge number of studies that have examined this issue at both levels, okay, both at the macro and micro level. And there are a lot of common elements that come out of these two sets of issues. So I will first talk about the spatial variation from a macro perspective, and then I will do the micro level aspect of it. And what emerges from both these set of literature is that there are a lot of variables, a lot of factors that have been identified in the literature as key determinants that cause this kind of spatial variation, okay, both at the macro and at the micro level. So we will look at then what is the extent of the spatial variation in those determinants themselves, and that said, is there anything that one can do in terms of policy. So that's what this paper aims to cover, okay. So first, looking at the macro view, okay, at any time you have doubts or clarifications, please feel free to stop me and ask, okay. So I don't want it to be just a monologue where I keep talking and then maybe some of you will get bored. It has to be kind of it can be a very interactive session, and also some of the issues would be such that it can generate some debate and discussion. So that is, if we achieve that, then it will be a good thing too, okay. So first look at the macro view. So when I talk of macro view, what do I mean? You have states and states in the country, and how does the what is the agricultural performance in different states? So this is the question that people have examined, okay. So there are different ways one can look at it. People have looked at GDP per capita coming from agriculture and how it varies. If you look at the absolute levels of GDP per capita, or rather GSDP per capita from different states, and I mean from agriculture in different states, you will find that Punjab and Haryana are really at the top, and the eastern states, especially Bihar, is close to the bottom, or maybe they are at the bottom, okay. States like Bihar, Odisha and so on, they are really at the low end, and the differential between the per capita income from agriculture between Punjab on one side and Bihar on another side is really huge, okay. So one way that people have and also people have expressed concern that maybe the gap is also widening, okay. So that is something which people have worried about, and one simple metric by which one can examine this issue or assess the extent of difference between states is basically to compute the coefficient of variation, okay. And what I have here is basically the coefficient of variation in GSDP per capita computed for each point for each year, okay, over a fairly long period of about 20 years, so roughly 2 decades that we have covered here, from 1994 to 2015, okay. So what one does see is that if you look at the magnitude, I don't know if it is visible from the back, but this is showing some 40%, okay. So the CV, if you compute, it's basically unit free measure, right, and so you can express it as a percentage, and it's about 40% here. It has ranged between 40 to 45 in the early 90s, and there's some evidence of a decline in the 2000s. Okay, the meaning that there is some kind of narrowing of the gap. From about 40%, it has come to you can see it here clearly that it's come down to about 35%. Okay, and this is not confined only to GSDP per capita. You consider several metrics of agricultural performance, such as output growth, labor and land productivity, whatever it is you look at. That is, land productivity is nothing but yields. Name the metric and you will find substantial variation across states, and you do find quite a bit of variation across states regardless of what metric you use. And this is there's a huge literature right from the 1960s actually, and in fact even if you go back to the plan documents, okay, the old plan documents, the third plan, fourth plan, etc., if you go back then itself, people were concerned about the spatial variation in agriculture. You do find that in the policy documents also, and there have been several studies that came about, and these are some of the recent ones that I have mentioned here, but coming in a long line of such studies. Okay, as I said, you will find it in different metrics, and you can also see this in terms of the share of gross value added, agricultural gross value added in the total. Okay, again you will find that there are at one end you have Madhya Pradesh, which is having about 35% share. Okay, 35% of the GSDP in Madhya Pradesh comes from agriculture, whereas in a state like Karnataka or Uttarakhand, it is less than 10%. So it's not just per capita income, but even in terms of how important agriculture is to the state's economy. Okay, so there also you find that in some states agriculture is pretty important, in other states it is important but doesn't have such a big share in the economy of that state. So also in terms of the growth rate, it's possibly not very clear. There is a second bar here for every state, and that is the growth rate in agricultural GVA over that period. Okay, and that also you see Madhya Pradesh had the highest growth rate, whereas a state like Arunachal Pradesh had negative growth rate, Himachal Pradesh also had negative growth rate in the GVA coming from agriculture. So again, in terms of growth rates also it is there is variation. So it's not like in a particular year every state is growing. There are some states which see a decline also in the a negative growth is seen in some states. So in that sense there is a lot of variation across states. This is in terms of the agricultural output. Okay, these are again coefficient of variations. We computed for 3 sets of groups. One in between is the sum total of output from crops and livestock. This is a coefficient of variation in livestock output, and this is the coefficient of variation in the crop output. Okay, so what you clearly see is that again, I mean, this even if you take crop output, it's about 40%, but if you look at livestock output, it is almost 60%. That's the coefficient of variation in livestock output. So go down to the subsectors of agriculture, and again you will see enormous variations. Yes. No, mining does not come under agriculture. Mining is primary sector, but it is not part of agriculture. Agriculture consists of crops, it will include livestock, fisheries, forestry, okay, and also irrigation services. It's also included in the agriculture and allied activities. So it's everything to do only with agriculture, okay. Whereas mining is a separate activity in the national accounts. No, no, I'm not looking at mining at all. Okay. So looking at the subsector, again you will find huge variation, that there's far greater variation in livestock output than in crop output, okay. So that's another feature that you will find. So what is the sum total of, I mean, people have written huge number of papers are there. There are some books also on these issues. What is the findings from these, and what are the causes that people have talked about for these kind of variation across states? Okay. The most important thing that people have laid stress on is public infrastructure. Public infrastructure, especially that which is relevant to agriculture. Okay. So you would find a lot of stress in the literature on roads, public transport, and then you will find financial services and power for agriculture. These are the things that people have talked about. Okay, this is public infrastructure, which is you will see that roads, public transport, financial services, and power, electricity, basically all these also can be used in other services sectors of the economy. Okay, so in that sense it's a very general infrastructure. But there are also agriculture related investments that people have talked about, which is the extent of urbanization, and state policy have been also stressed about in recent times. So here one talks of agricultural investment, meaning that investments in irrigation, in land, prevention of land degradation, maintaining soil quality, conservation of various resources that agriculture needs, such as biodiversity and so on, and also things like storage facilities. Okay, investments in marketing yards, markets and marketing yards, storage facilities and so on, cold chains. These are all things in which investments are required for agricultural growth, and you would find that there is substantial variation across states. Yes, one here and one there.
Whenever you are talking about the investment on all these sectors, we should also care about the investment on the research and development, because if you see the data from the last 25 to 30 years over India, it has been declined, even not in the less than 5 or 4% of the total expenditure of the agriculture. So this is a key factor, because in this scenario,
in fact, there are a lot of issues on that part also. I will come to it. There is one more question. Maybe if it is related, I will answer them together. Yeah. Okay. Livestock output, in particular, needs greater investment in various things, some of which touches upon the research and development issues also. Okay, I have not laid down everything here. Okay, but people have stressed on the research and development side. People have stressed about agricultural research agricultural extension services, okay, and whether the research is coming up with technologies which are relevant to the local conditions.
So recently we have done the exercise on the milk supply in India with the producer. We found that the technology infrastructure is a major important factor. Even prices not affected on the supply response, but the technology and infrastructure is the most important.
Right, I agree.
Crossbreed and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So that's the point. So if you look at it historically, agricultural research went a lot into the three main cereals, wheat, rice and maize. Okay, they have not gone that far in terms of technologies in for millets. Okay, all your jowar, bajra, ragi and so on, they have not really come out with technologies that give big yields in these crops. Okay, there is also an aspect of pricing of these commodities. There are issues in storing these commodities. Okay, but these are the issues on which the research has to go in, and they have not really gone in on those dimensions. Okay, this is on the crop side. Okay, then you have issues relating to oil seeds, you have issues relating to fruits and vegetables and so on, cotton. In all these commodities, there is a huge variation in the research outcomes and how it is kind of, whether it is actually coming down to something, coming up with technologies that are relevant for the local conditions. So there the research outcomes are not uniform across states. So that's an important factor. And also related, closely related is the issue of extension. Okay, there again you need investments, and different states, remember that agriculture is a state subject. Okay, so the unsaid thing here is that the state policy has said some states have invested, some have not. Now why is that? I don't know, but that is the outcome. I mean, that is the important thing that is driving. And investments, the word investment is a catch-all word. It can be in irrigation, it can be in research, extension, storage facilities and so on. Okay, not all states have invested equally in all dimensions, and you find that that situation continues, and you will find that is a main reason for the kind of variation across states that we see here. But there are also agroclimatic conditions. So this is a geography aspect that I will come to later on in my second lecture. Okay, so these are all people have talked about. The other important aspect that people have identified is diversification. Okay, the extent of diversification within agriculture is not again uniform across states. Okay, so the extent of diversification across states is also not shows enormous variation. Okay, some states are more diversified, some are less diversified. Okay, and this diversification you can talk about in terms of the production diversification. Okay, so in terms of if you look at the output, whether the basket consists of a few set of commodities or a lot more set of commodities. Okay, so this is the issue that that people have talked about, and then one finds that when you measure the diversification, there are measures of diversification. One of them is the Simpsons Index, which is widely used. Okay, and you will find that the Simpsons Index is highest in terms of the value of crop output, indicating that there is diversification, but it shows a constant trend over time. Okay, and similarly the Simpsons Index for the value of livestock output has also been high, but it is declining over the years, indicating that there is some specialization taking place. So this is the Simpsons Index that is plotted here for various years. This is coming from a different study, okay. And here you will find that the value of output from crops, they are all different, okay. So this is the, if you look at the gross domestic product from agriculture, it shows a very narrow level of varied diversification, whereas this is for what is this? This is the value of output from livestock. This is for crops, and even in this is the extent of diversification in the cropped area. Okay, how much land is allocated to different crops, and whether that shows a significant diversification or not, that is seen here, and then you find the crop output also. Okay, the answer is the way to look at that issue is the state has, every state has its own agroclimatic condition, right? It has, the soil types are different, the amount of rainfall it receives is different, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now within the soil, within these agroclimatic conditions, there's possibly a certain number of products that can be grown there. The question is, do you do all of them? Is the state able to do all of them? And here you will find that some states have actually gone the other way around. Okay. For example, Punjab and Haryana, when I was doing my PhD about 30 years ago, the data would show Punjab, Haryana growing pulses. Today, if you look at the cropping pattern in Punjab, Haryana, where are the pulses? Okay, so pulses in Punjab, Haryana is a suitable crop, but they went the other way around. Okay, so that is one aspect, whether the crop, the product mix that you are growing, are you actually optimally exploiting your natural conditions? Okay, the resource availability, the climatic conditions, whether you are there and optimally exploiting all that. And that's one dimension to it. A second dimension to it is in terms of how do I put it? This is an issue that I will talk also in the third lecture, whether the diversification or the extent of diversification is actually maximizing your income within the state. Okay, and this is something you can examine again at the macro and at the micro level. In fact, in the third lecture that I will talk on that aspect. So you will find that the answer is states have to diversify. There is potential for diversification, but they are not there. Okay, so specialization aspect is there. Okay, you do specialize in commodities that are suitable or best grown in that region. So in the drier parts of Karnataka or Andhra, you don't grow rice because there is no comparative advantage in rice in those regions. So you have to grow millets. Okay. Do you grow sufficient millets? There are issues on where do you go and sell them. Is there a sufficient market for millets? That's the other side of the problem. Okay. One would talk of diversification in diets and so on. Okay. This set of issues are all linked, but I'm not getting into those things here, okay, but the sum and substance of what I'm trying to say is you can do better, but you are far below what you can do, even in terms of the product mix that is suitable for your region. And the product mix that is suitable for Punjab is not the same as for the semi-arid tropics of Andhra or Karnataka, or for Bihar it is a different mix, or for if you go to Odisha it will be a different mix. Every state, the mix of products that you can cultivate, the set of animal products that one can grow, that one can produce, differs. The question is whether you are able to achieve all that product mix efficiently or not.
I think government policy is also responsible for the diversification. Because for the states like a Punjab, where they are the monoculture, producing the monoculture wheat and paddy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
The big reason behind that is government is procuring
Right.
for the wheat and paddy.
Yes. Yeah. So you have. So the question is, why did agriculture in Punjab and Haryana, from a diverse basket, why did they narrow down? This is the problem. The government was making it an assured income, was giving an assured markets with huge subsidies for two commodities, rice and wheat. It just ignored everything else. So it's a very, very rational decision for farmers in Punjab and Haryana to grow rice and wheat. Yes. So the entire government policy focused on these two commodities. Okay, and that is where you are now, and it is causing a lot of environmental damage in those two states. And I remember in one workshop there was one person from Punjab. He was almost in tears and says that he says Punjab can become Bayab, meaning 5 rivers. Punjab, 5 rivers. Bayab, no rivers, desert. He said it can become that. He said, and maybe some people are really worried that Punjab can become a desert. So I don't know. That's not impossible. Okay, if you look at the groundwater level in those states, to think that those states can become a desert is not very far in the horizon. Okay, so spatial variation is seen in the diversification also, and this has a lot to do with agricultural incomes, both in terms of at the macro level in terms of the state's agricultural growth, but even in terms of the micro level incomes that farmers receive. Okay, so what we found is there is variation in diversification across states in terms of production, in terms of value of agricultural output, GSDP, and also gross cropped area. Okay, and we find that Himachal Pradesh shows the highest diversification in terms of GSDP from agriculture. Okay, and Andhra shows the highest diversification in terms of the total value of output from agriculture relative to all India. Okay, so this picture shows, if you take all India, if you consider the all India mix of commodities, okay, then you get a certain Simpsons Index for that. Now compared to that, how do each state, where do each state fall? Okay, some will be more diversified than the all India basket, some would be less diversified. Okay, so not surprisingly you find Punjab and Haryana here far less diversified than the all India mix. Okay, whereas Himachal, Kerala is a highly diversified product mix. Okay, so these are some of the states with a good amount of diversification, because the agroclimatic conditions are suitable and they are also doing that. Okay, whereas at the other end you find Gujarat, Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Andhra. These are all states that have gone in for, I mean, Rajasthan for some odd reason is there, but if you ignore Rajasthan for the moment, you find that all these states have concentrated more on rice, wheat, either rice alone or rice and wheat together, and they're all in that kind of a problem. In the case of Gujarat, it's also cotton. There's a huge concentration in cotton.
I have concern regarding the methodology. Is it that we shall compare all India basket?
This is the Simpsons Index. Okay.
That too takes into account the commodities.
Yeah. Madhya Pradesh is close to 1 or Tamil Nadu is slightly less than 1. It doesn't mean that Tamil Nadu or Madhya Pradesh is having the same basket as all India. No. It is just that the share that the state output is getting is as diversified across that set of commodities they grow. Okay. So there is no concentration of a particular commodity. That's what we are trying to capture. It doesn't mean that they have the same basket as all India. No. Okay. So it shows that you are kind of having as the shares that you are getting from your basket of commodities is similar in the sense that there is a lack of concentration in one or two set of commodities. Yeah.
Although it looks good that Kerala has higher diversification, but the reality is for Kerala, their paddy cultivation has declined. One of the reasons is availability of labor, and they depend on other states for that staple rice. And the other
What is wrong with that?
So the problem is that
What is wrong if Kerala depends on, say, Tamil Nadu or Andhra for its rice?
that is okay, but this diversity, this looks good when you look at this trend and pattern. But
Okay, and it's not grown in huge amounts. Okay, but there are some people who are willing to pay the high price, and there are some farmers growing that for them. Okay, it's basically economics they're working out, so I don't find that a problem. And so this is in terms of, again, we show in terms of various metrics. Okay, that was in terms of value of output. This is in terms of value of output from agriculture relative to India. Again, so you find some amount of variation. Some states are less diversified than others, and so on. This is in terms of the allocation of land to various crops. And you see here again, there's a lot more. Some states actually, the allocation patterns are very, very concentrated. So the amount of land going into a few set of crops is very large in states like Punjab, Himachal, Jammu. Okay. So, sorry? That's again, I mean, this is a problem with the data, because it will show, the data will talk of vegetables. It doesn't give the breakup of the vegetables. You don't get, so we do not know how many vegetables are grown. So if you are considering vegetables as one group, that shows up as a concentration. So it's a problem related to the way the data is also reported. Okay, so that will then show up. But if you have all the detailed commodities, then probably this will not look as bad for Bihar. It will not look as bad for Bihar. I agree, but that's a problem with the data, because it comes up as a crop group. Right? I need to say that his question was Bihar is 40-45% going into horticulture. This is not so bad, okay. But the way you are using the data in the Simpsons Index also matters. So if this is done using crop groups, cereals as a group, vegetables as a group, then you will find this showing up that bad, okay, because there is one group which is having 45% of the land, okay. But if I had the data for individual crops, then Bihar will not look so bad. That's the point, related to how you use, how the data is available and how you are using it in these computations also. So yes, there could be, but there may be some those kind of deficiencies in these computations. But the point is, there are some states which are more diversified, some which are less diversified in terms of the way they allocate the resources also. Okay. Now, at the macro level, one aspect that has attracted attention, the one way that people have assessed this spatial variation in the performance is the question of convergence in agriculture. Okay, are the states converging in some sense to each other? Okay, the beginning I showed that this coefficient of variation is coming down, right? In terms of per capita income, GSDP per capita, this coefficient of variation has fallen somewhat, and that's the kind of a question. Okay, basically, are the poorer states catching up with the richer states? That's essentially the idea here, and there is a whole lot of literature. So convergence literature is actually a huge literature globally, looking at cross country, okay, whether the poorer countries are catching up with the developed countries. So that has been the focus of the convergence literature, and there are theories of growth which tell under what conditions convergence will happen, okay. And they have identified several factors that will facilitate convergence or that will ensure that there is divergence, okay. So there are a whole lot of that, and that literature, those methods have been used in the Indian context also. There are at least there are a few studies which have looked at the agricultural part of it, okay. There are studies that looked at convergence across states in terms of the GSDP aggregate, okay, in terms of the total GSDP, and there are a few studies that looked at the agriculture alone, whether the agriculture performance across states is converging or not, okay. Now, here you find mixed evidence, depending on what variable people have considered. You find mixed evidence, okay. So in terms of agricultural TFP growth, okay, that is the total factor productivity growth, Mukherjee and Kurora find some evidence of convergence, okay. But Ghosh does not find any such evidence and suggests that there have been divergence in labor productivity as opposed to total factor productivity, okay. So depending on the metric that they are looking at, the results are also different, okay. Now now this one is what I am going to talk in my next lecture, so don't bother about this much. So there is something called, okay, I mean in the convergence literature, do all states converge or not? If they don't converge, then do they converge to some clusters? Okay, so is there a clustering of states in terms of income levels? Okay, and what we find is that there is in fact cluster convergence happening. Okay, so you find there are some groups of states clustering at different levels of income. Okay, but that also there are variations over time, that I will talk about in greater detail in my next lecture. Okay, and what is also coming out is that the spatial dependence in agricultural growth is driven by these factors. Okay. Now there is something called spatial difference. That is, I don't know if you are aware of this. How many of you have had some exposure to spatial econometrics? Okay. So then there's one person here. So spatial dependence is basically, okay, in time series context, you know autocorrelation, right? So observation T dependent on T minus 1. Okay, in a spatial context, yes, okay, it's not so much the error term, but the y variable itself that you are looking at. So yi dependent on yj, where I and j are two states. Okay, in a nutshell, that is the idea. Okay. And so we find that there is spatial dependence in agriculture, meaning that the agriculture performance in one state is influenced by what happens in the next state. Okay, and that in turn is because of these are the driving factors, that roads, irrigation, electricity, diversification, human capital. These are all the drivers of this spatial dependence. Okay, okay, I will present more on this little later. Okay, the bottom line from this literature that comes out is that there is significant spatial variation. It is persisting in several dimensions of agriculture, and we actually don't find clear-cut evidence of convergence across states. In some variables convergence, in some not so much, and so on. Cluster convergence is possibly more prominent. Okay. Sorry? That's how you do the spatial econometrics that comes in. Okay, so I can talk of that, but we are going slightly away from this. Okay, but the idea in spatial econometrics is that this is where the geography aspect comes in. Okay, that your performance is conditioned on your own circumstances. That is of course the most important thing, but also your neighborhood. Okay, so what happens in Gujarat may be very far away for Bihar. Okay, but to the extent markets are linked, okay, so even though Gujarat is far away from Bihar, geographically speaking, in terms of price transmissions, it may not be very far off. Okay, so if a certain commodity that is grown in Bihar is in high demand in Gujarat, the price for that will grow, will shoot up, and farmers in Bihar can respond to that, provided they have the means of actually carrying the commodity there. Okay, that is where the roads, connectivity, all those issues come in. Okay, so the spatial interlinkages need not happen with respect to each and every variable. Okay, electricity may not matter, but maybe it is the commodity prices. Okay, so and this is common and it happens globally. Okay, if whenever India has a bumper crop in rice, global prices of rice go down. happens globally. Whenever there is a major supply shock in wheat in some of the large producers like the US or Argentina or Australia or Russia, if any of those countries experience a major supply shock, global prices change. So when the price effect is felt globally, between Bihar and Gujarat also you will find that happening. Okay. The question then is whether the farmer in Bihar is able to exploit that opportunity. That's the different question. But is there an effect felt here? Yes. Unless one is living in a remote island with no connectivity to the rest of the world. Okay. Yeah.
Same kind of results when the convergence improves the statistics. We have done
In say irrigation,
Road irrigation, electricity, all are like total planned, right?
humanly made, yes. But last year, for example, or all of you would be aware that Tamil Nadu has a huge drought this year. But much of it is because last year the Western Ghats in Karnataka did not receive rainfall. So, and Bihar knows this much more. Rains heavily in Bengal, floods in Bihar. So there are these spatial linkages which exist. And these are real linkages, and the solutions have to be. You have to take basically there is a certain political economy problem that needs to be solved. Then the technical solutions are available, but it is a political economy that has not been sorted out. Okay. So you can see this in terms of the farmer's income. Okay. What we find is that, okay, first of all, measuring farmers' income is a major hassle because there is no data set. In fact, there is no data set on income distribution in India, let alone farmers' income. Okay. So the best that one can do is to look at the NSS situation assessment rounds, because what it reports is the revenue from crop and livestock output, and they also give the expenditure that the farm households incur on crop and livestock. Okay. So one can actually work out the net income from crop and livestock. So it basically returns to farming that one can work out. Okay. Plus it also, the NSS rounds also have information on the net receipts from non-farm sector, non-farm activities. So what it means is that if a farm household also has some, say, a shop, a petty shop, so whatever income that the farm household is getting from that petty shop is collected. Okay. So the expenditure that household incurs on running the shop, they have that information on that non-farm business. It could be a shop, it could be, say, a flour mill, in the village. It could be various kinds of non-farm activities that a particular farm household is involved in. So the income, the revenue that they get and the expenditure in the business is known, plus any wages and salary if some member of the household is, say, a school teacher or working as a working in the post office or some such thing. Okay, it could be some village enterprise working in say a factory in the village or whatever. Okay, so wages and salaries are also reported. What they don't give is basically the transfer incomes. They don't have information on the transfer incomes that the household gets. that is pensions, any remittances from a family member staying outside the house, I mean outside of the village. Could be, in a city within India, maybe in Bombay or Delhi or wherever, or maybe even living outside the country but remitting some income to the household. So those transfer payments are not there. So in that sense, basically out of the core economic activity that the members of the household are involved, one can get some amount of, some idea on the income that they receive. Okay. And this can be used to assess what is the income that they receive in all. Okay. So there is a farmer's income that one can compute. And what, you might be aware that there were these rounds for 2002-3 and 12-13. Okay, these are available publicly, and currently there is one situation assessment round which is going on. Okay, this is for the period July 2018 to June 2019. Okay.
So if you look into the figures, the focus in the variation of income of lifestyle, it has been declining drastically. So whereas maybe around half it has been declining. So is there any kind of policy intervention for that particular lifestyle product?
I'll come to that. There are those in computing the income here. Okay. So don't look for trends here, because the definitions that NSS used in 2002-3 is quite different from the definitions in 2012. Huh? So there are a lot of methodological issues. Okay. So these are not straightforward comparable across time, but within that year you find there is variation across states in the farmer's income. So you look at each round in isolation and you will find some spatial variability in the income measure that you are estimating. But don't do this time trend business, because the two rounds are grossly different in terms of the definitions, in terms of the methods. Okay, so that's not a valid comparison. Okay, variation in farm income is low. Okay, but I wouldn't attach so much on the trend part of it. Okay, and okay, this is the paper I'm going to talk also in the afternoon, more detailed. Okay. Drivers of farmers' income, people have again talked about it. Okay, so there's a vast amount of literature that is coming up on farmers' income, and what are the things that people have talked about in terms of farmers' income or farm income. Okay, so farm and household level factors affect the income that they are defined. Okay, so there are several farm level in factors and household level factors that matter. Okay, so these include farm size, irrigation, the seeds that people use, the extent of diversification of the farm, of the household itself. You can check how diversified the household is. Okay, the household size, the education levels, and so on. So these are all things that people have commented as possible drivers of the farmer's income. And besides this, people have also said that there are some macro level factors which determine the household level income. Okay, and these are basically the same things that we have talked about earlier, namely irrigation, infrastructure, market, the general level of education, whereas here we are talking of the education at that particular household. So a particular household may not be well educated, but it could be an exceptional house in an otherwise a better educated district. Okay. So, but here we are talking of the overall education levels in the state, in the district or the state and so on. Okay. Now the thing here is that all these macro level structural features that people have talked about as important, these are all mentioned. Okay. The studies that look at the household level income, farmers' income at the household level, they cite these things, but they don't appear directly in the analysis. Okay, this is an important thing to know. And one important thing that comes about is that diversification affects the income. The level of diversification at the household level, okay, that also is important. And here one can distinguish in terms of crop diversification, livestock and non-farm. So whether the household has a mix of crops, a mix of animal products, and are they also into non-farm activities. So that's the diversification at the household level that you can talk about. There are some households that are only in agriculture, but they may be reasonably well diversified within agriculture. They may be growing a mix of crops or a mix of crops and some animal products, but they are not in non-agriculture sector. Or there may be some members of the household who are also in the non-farm sector. So what is the level of diversification at the household level? That also is an important driver of this income. Now, I don't know how clear this is. There is a spatial variation in farm diversification across districts. This is coming from the NSS forms. So if you look at the districts, there are some, this is the on-farm diversification in visit 1. Okay, the NSS collects data in 2 visits. So between January and June, they collect the data for the last July to December. Okay, so they do the survey between January and June, and they collect information for the previous Kharif. And then between July and December, they collect information for the previous Rabi. Okay, so that is visit 1 and this is visit 2. So this is visit 1. Visit 1 therefore gives information on the Kharif for 12-13. This is the Rabi for 12-13. Okay. So you find that this is we are showing the on-farm diversification. So there are some places where they are involved in only one activity. There are some districts where households are involved in as many as 5 to 6 activities. There are these few districts where the household level information shows that the household is involved in 5 to 6 farm activities. It could be crops and animals. Okay. One thing that we found in the sample is that there is no household in the sample, at least, which is involved only in animal production, animal products.
Can you be able to mod those 2 visits, visit 1 and visit 2? Suppose for looking into farm and non-farm income, can you be able to mod those 2 visits, visit 1 and then
When you say merge, you mean pool the data? Yeah, you can do that, because all the households that have been interviewed here, surveyed here, have been surveyed here, but between here to here there are some dropouts. Okay. So for all these households you can form a panel over the 2 visits. That is possible, and in fact in the paper that we do, that I will talk later in the afternoon, we do that also. Okay. So the point is that there are, so spatially you see that the level of diversification at the household level is also varying. Okay. in Kharif, it is far more in Rabi. You see, the two maps are quite different. So then here the number of activities also comes down in the Rabi season. You need irrigation, otherwise it won't work there. This is on farm. Okay. So what are the factors that we find there? So okay, I am going to talk about this in greater detail, but what we find is there are farm and household factors such as farm size, input use, household size. All these impact the farm diversification. However, there is a larger context and non-farm environment in which they operate. That is the macro level thing we don't know. Okay, they are operating there, but how actually the macro impacts the micro level outcomes, we don't know. But we know that there is a macro level story also going on there. Okay. And in a recent paper, Das finds that factors beyond the control of the farm and the household. Okay, there are factors which are beyond the control of the farm or the household, and they matter for diversification. Okay, these include the neighborhood. Okay, there are issues like economies of density, labor markets, relative prices. Okay, that could be specific to the neighborhood in which the farmer is operating. Okay. Then there are issues like public transport, access to schools and colleges, agricultural credit, power for agriculture use, non-farm activity, groundwater recharge. These are all factors which are not in the farmer's control, but they matter. Okay, they all affect the level of diversification at the household level. How dense the markets are. Yeah. Okay. In the sense that at the local level, if you have if a lot of people are involved in a certain activity, then it generates some kind of an economies of scale. It is similar to that. Okay. So imagine that if in a village there are only one or two guys who is growing a certain crop, so he is not going to benefit from the neighborhood in growing that crop. Okay, so others will say, "हाँ वो कुछ करता है." We don't know what he is doing, but he is growing something. Okay, but as opposed to that, if in a village many farmers are involved in a particular thing, then there are group economies of scale. Even though individually they are not operating at large scale, but nevertheless there is a some kind of a scale economies come that they get. Okay. For example, if in a village many farmers are cultivating, say, mushrooms. Okay, because it's a very niche product. Mushroom cultivation is a niche product. If only one person is doing, the entire risk is on that person. But because there is no scope for learning and so on, he is dependent on some external sources for information on what to do, how to do, etc. Whereas if in the village many are doing that, then they are likely to benefit from neighborhood effects. So that is the economies of density. Okay. So if many are involved, then there may be buyers willing to come there, because if a particular buyer comes there, he can source from many farmers, as opposed to there is one guy growing mushroom. So for any procurement agency, the cost of procurement becomes large, so they will not go there, as opposed to a village where many are involved in that activity. So these are the kind of economies of density that one can get. So but that depends on your neighborhood. Okay. So if the rest of the village is also, if a substantial number of people in the rest of the village are involved in the same activity, then there are these economies that you will get. That's what we are meaning by economies of density. Similarly, labor market also. Okay, local labor market matters. What happens to the local labor market? Okay, public transport. These are things which are important, and whose the way they affect the local level outcomes is not well understood. Intuitively we know public transport matters, but how exactly does it work? Are we sure that public transport always leads to a growth in farm income? Can we be sure of that? Not necessarily. Okay, and the route may be through the labor market. So if a bus is coming every day to the village, many villages may go to the city and work. So the agriculture may suffer because they don't have labor there. So how it affects is something that needs to be researched. Okay, there is some research coming up now on these issues, but I am sure there is a lot of things that can be studied there. There is a lot of open-ended research questions are there. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, okay, this guy is doing PhD with me, and he finds some fantastic things which you don't think of it at first. When you start with, you don't think of it, but he gets certain results, and then when you start thinking, it begins to make sense. Urbanization, does it benefit farming? Yeah. I mean, he finds that actually it's the size of the town also matters. Okay. Yeah, so when we think of urbanization for an agricultural person, there's a big market, but a lot of villages are going away to work there. Then what do I do in the farm? Yes, there is a big market, but I can't exploit the market. I don't have the labor. Okay? Similarly, schools and colleges, what do you expect? Education, we keep saying. What do you expect? Education would be the impact.
Obviously, the person once they got a good education, they will live further.
Okay, so we build schools and colleges in the village area. What do you expect? Huh? You will get. That's what we are meaning by economies of density. Similarly, labor market also. Okay, local labor market matters. What happens to the local labor market? Okay, public transport. These are things which are important, and whose the way they affect the local level outcomes is not well understood. Intuitively we know public transport matters, but how exactly does it work? Are we sure that public transport always leads to a growth in farm income? Can we be sure of that? Not necessarily. Okay, and the route may be through the labor market. So if a bus is coming every day to the village, many villages may go to the city and work. So the agriculture may suffer because they don't have labor there. So how it affects is something that needs to be researched. Okay, there is some research coming up now on these issues, but I am sure there is a lot of things that can be studied there. There is a lot of open-ended research questions are there.
Same kind of result we have
Yeah,
Is urbanization and infrastructure.
yeah. In fact, okay, this guy is doing PhD with me, and he finds some fantastic things which you don't think of it at first. When you start with, you don't think of it, but he gets certain results, and then when you start thinking, it begins to make sense. Urbanization, does it benefit farming? Yeah. I mean, he finds that actually it's the size of the town also matters. Okay. Yeah, so when we think of urbanization for an agricultural person, there's a big market, but a lot of villagers are going away to work there. Then what do I do in the farm? Yes, there is a big market, but I can't exploit the market. I don't have the labor. Okay? Similarly, schools and colleges, what do you expect? Education, we keep saying. What do you expect? Education would be the impact.
Obviously, the person once they go for good education, they will live further.
Okay, so we build schools and colleges in the village area. What do you expect? Huh? This is it, and there is nothing further to research about. I am not saying that. There are a lot of micro level things that go on, okay, which is affecting the outcome. Okay. There are so many determinants and determinants and determinants at the macro level, at the micro level. So, if you find the outcomes to have spatial variation and these are the determinants, what is the story with the determinants themselves? Okay. Now here, okay, these are the coefficient of variation across the districts in India in various determinants. Okay. Operational land holding, proportion of urban population in the district, villages with access to public transport, access to agriculture market, financial service, proportion of agricultural and allied credit, the total credit, how much credit flows to agriculture, okay, power for agriculture use in summer, winter, commercial use, summer, winter, the replenishment of groundwater recharge during the monsoon and during the non-monsoon seasons, non-monsoon months, and you find significant variation in many of them. This is the only thing which has the least variation.
The farmer as they go and cultures does not take part to the quality of farm because it must be there. Farmer but you cannot run your motor.
Yes, I agree that I don't deny that the quality is not an issue, but we don't get the data on that, okay. We get the data on power available for agriculture use, number of hours per day on an average, okay. It doesn't talk about the voltage at which you get the electricity. We don't know. It could be pretty useless. It may not even charge your mobile phone. That also I agree, okay. But that apart, but even to the limited extent that you have information on a quantitative aspect, they matter. The quality story is there. I am not denying its importance, okay. But in all this, you see, there are only two things which show, which is not having that great spatial variation. One is proportion of villages within the district with access to public transport. Okay, that's only 7.5%, the coefficient of variation, all India. The public transport seems to have penetrated all over. Okay, and this is this is God's hand, okay, groundwater recharge during monsoon. That's also not, so it seems to be, I mean, it's not such a major problem. Whereas in the non-monsoon season, the recharge is a problem. 62.5% CV. Okay, so this is where all the pumping happens in the non-monsoon season, and then we are depleting the water. We are just mining it away. Okay. So this is land holding size. Land holding size. Okay, we find it's more or less the same. The coefficient of variation in land holding is not much. Actually, if you restrict yourself to farms below, I think 6 hectares, you find that all over the country is more or less the same. This is where the size of farms have come down more or less uniformly everywhere. It's not specific to some parts of the country. All over the country you are now having, you see, this is all same color. See, but that proportion is very, okay. 85% or less than what?
What could be the reason behind that? Why the farms are
The biggest reason is your two things. The law allows division of land. Every child is entitled to it. And the fact of the matter is, siblings want a share. They don't worry about the economies of the farm. They want a share in the land. This is a sociological aspect.
No, I'm asking about that. Every size of holding in the Punjab from the last 2 decades has been increased.
That is because many are selling and migrating out of the country. Out, permanent migration out. The state is fast going to become a desert, so you have accumulated the wealth, now migrate. Makes sense. Personally, okay. This is urban population, proportion of urban population. Here you find that there are some patches which are more urbanized than other states. Okay. Less variation in access to public transport. You see, it's all thick, dark. Okay, so this is one thing in which more or less the same all over the country. Whereas this is the proportion of villages with access to agriculture market. Okay, and then here you find it is uneven. There are places where
Based on the NSS.
yes, these are all NSS data. No, this could be a mix of NSS and data from census. No, public transport and all will be from census. Census data. Okay, that is something I need to tell. Okay, be there in the paper. Okay, there is a paper along with it, and it is there in the paper. Okay, this is power for agricultural use during summer months, hours per day, that is in winter. Okay, again you see there are clear patterns. Some states have a much higher power availability than other states, and there are differences between the seasons also. This is for commercial use. Okay, the census gives you this information distinguished by agriculture and commercial use. Here again, between summer and winter you find there is difference. Okay, the thicker ones are 15 to 24 hours you are getting, okay, the darker areas, whereas the lighter it is the number of hours of availability is lower, and you find the eastern states have serious problem.
This data taken from H stage of
Census.
H series. How do that happen?
No, district level something is there?
Which series?
No, not you are getting for villages. At the village, for each village, you have some information in the census. So this is using that data. Okay. So these are the these are the at the district level. What is the average power availability? Yes, village from villages we aggregate it to the district and it is shown in the map. Groundwater recharge, this is what I was saying. So a lot more recharge happens during the monsoon, hardly anything in the non-monsoon period. Okay. So this is where the problem is, that when we talk of spatial variation in agriculture, and we know that there are determinants both at the macro and at the micro level, we find that even those determinants have serious show serious spatial variation, right? So in terms of policy, what is it one can talk about? So there is geographic spatial context to agriculture performance, we see that, and it is crucial to understand the drivers at drivers of diversification, drivers of agricultural growth, okay, and also what happens to the farms at the micro level also. What we find is this variation in these structural factors, and one has to really address these structural factors which are at the district level. I mean, which some of it actually have to be addressed by other sectors. Okay, so you say, for example, something like power availability, right? Now this is not something which the agriculture ministry can solve, but it's an issue for the power ministry to work on, okay, for state governments to work upon, and if they are able to solve the problem in the power sector, then its spin-off for agriculture is very visible. Okay, agriculture would grow when power sector grows. The transportation, in terms of public transport, there is kind of uniformity all over the country now, but when it comes to, say, power, when it comes to markets, these are the issues on which you find significant variations, and not all of it is under the Ministry of Agriculture. They are under different ministries.
At the same time, power ministry also complains to agriculture ministry that they are providing electricity, they are not taking electricity.
To me, a shopkeeper keeping a bowl of chocolates out in the open and complaining that it keeps vanishing, what do you expect? You offer power at zero rates or very highly subsidized power, everybody will then declare themselves a farmer and want that subsidized power. It's very natural. That's to me very natural, nothing surprising about it. People have been writing about it, and if you want to subsidize, think of a different way of subsidizing. Price subsidies are bad, period. That's it, there is nothing else. It's a bad policy. Provide income support if you want to take care of the poor. Okay, you want to provide food for the poor? Don't have MSP or PDS. Instead, give them an income transfer. Allow them to buy wherever they want, they can buy. Yeah. But that alternative literature ignores Punjab becoming Bayab. That's not a problem for that alternative literature. Yes, I know. We can't remove MSP till PDS is sorted out. I know that. I myself written on that. So if you want to take care of poor consumers, give them income supports. Don't go mess around with commodities. You have messed around too much. That's why everybody wants to grow rice, even if it is unsustainable ecologically.
Income support, cash transfer, or something like that?
Yeah.
Giving direct income to workers, is there any study?
Any productivity issues, we're not talking of any productivity issues when we are talking of income transfers. We're talking of income transfers to households.
No, so for example, if we are giving MSP to encourage production also for that particular crop, and on the other
I'm
hand,
saying that is the bad strategy.
yeah, but
Giving an MSP
how is a good strategy giving income?
because then you are leaving it to the consumers to determine what they want to eat. Okay?
So it will have an impact in the labor market.
Wait.
It is happening.
Wait. I'm not asking you to give a whole lot of income that is enough for them to, just sit at home and relax. That's not the point. The point is give them something more which can enable them to consume and achieve a certain minimum. But that minimum is just bare minimum. Okay? It is not something that will take care of their labor leisure choice and then go for leisure rather than labor. So, if you have estimated that for whatever, based on whatever calculations, okay, if you think every household should eat 20 kilos of, every individual should eat 20, what do they give in ration shop? 20 kilos of rice. Yeah. If you think every household need of 5 members should get 20 kilos rice minimum, and if you have worked out that this is the equivalent subsidy that you are giving, don't target it at particular commodities. You are distorting the market. You are distorting production incentives in the process. And that has, in the case of agriculture, huge ecological costs. And you are shooting yourself in the foot in the long run. You become affordable. Today, this is the thing. They used to be called coarse cereals, whereas rice and wheat were classified as fine cereals. Okay, some amount of racialism here. Okay, but the idea here is that if you look at the prices of those commodities in the 50s and 60s, these were more costlier commodities, whereas the millets were far cheaper. Okay, today the relative price is just the opposite. Millets are more expensive than rice and wheat.
What happened is the central government is providing.
When the Green Revolution started. Okay, PDS has been in existence since World War II. Do you know that? World War II, the Britishers introduced it because they had to ration food to ensure that during the wartime prices were not getting out of control. So the Britishers introduced ration shop in urban areas. And for that, the moment you say rationing, you have to start getting things. So they were procuring from some areas and supplying it. This was limited to a few major urban centers. Okay, later on it went to all urban centers, and later on it went into the rural areas. But the MSP was thought of as a price support, price incentive, okay, but since 1965, what has happened? We became food self-sufficient by end of 1970s. We became food self-sufficient. Okay, that was the idea of MSP, that you want, because you were importing food, you wanted to achieve some amount of food self-sufficiency, so you gave an MSP. So all this had context. Okay, so the moment you achieve food self-sufficiency, then what did you do? You started exporting. You had buffer stock norms. Okay, and today what do you have? What is the stock position today? I don't know, 80 million tons, 70, 80 million tons. Okay, ask yourself this question: does India need 70 million tons of food in storage? For what? And all that you have mined water to produce and keep it in the storage, for what? You are mining water, please remember that. And you are favoring just two commodities. Okay, MSP you are starting for ragi and all now, some states. Okay, you start giving in PDS, that will generate a demand, then production will start, and very soon there will be pressures for a support price, and very soon you will end up stocking them. Okay, so the 50-60 years of what you have done for rice and wheat, you will replicate in millets. Then which commodity next? How much are you going to do this? Do you have the resources for that? Fiscal resources do you have for that?
This is also not useful in all the scenarios, right?
I agree.
We have a demo study on the parallel. What we found, there is a negative impact of the parallel land and the previous ration card. The person who is getting a ration from the previous card, they are living the land as a family. So basically they have a daily holding of size. They give the preference to luxury life as compared to the production at the inland holding site, because they are not able to enough production from the size of holding they have. That is the negative effect on that. Also, 7.5% of the total area is the parallel Indian area. What happened recently in the Andhra Pradesh, there is a different development society. They have taken all the parallel land together. It's a kind of a NGO. They distributed among the retail family. They are basically producing the millets and the oatseed, and that is sufficient for their food security. We can do that kind of policy.
Yeah, the point, I agree that there is a lot of sit back, think whether a certain policy is making sense or not.